In theological college, one of the little tips and tricks that was taught to students in formation was, if you've got something like a baptism planned, make sure you line it up on a day when the readings allocated in the lectionary aren't going to really go against the grain of the celebration for that day. In other words, you don't want a whole bunch of visitors coming to church. They're coming to see a cute baby baptised, and the readings for the day are, a bit rough, and they require a fair bit of work to understand. And in hindsight, I should have considered applying that principle for today. Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother cannot be my disciple. Happy Father's Day, fellas. Happy Father's Day. Now, you take it at face value, and it's a shock. Think about it for more than a few seconds, and some other things may come to mind. For example, isn't there a commandment about honouring your father and mother? I'm pretty sure Jesus also commanded us to love our neighbours as ourselves, and neighbours, in the sense that he uses it, surely includes parents. And don't some parts of the Christian church get particularly worked up about something called family values? Surely this isn't the passage they would have in mind when advocating for Jesus-inspired family values. But there are abundant teachings in the Bible, not to mention demonstrative action, which make clear that whilst there is a powerful rhetorical effect in Jesus' statement here, it is indeed primarily that, rhetoric. And if we do a good old-fashioned Bible study, it brings a huge amount of clarity to what is meant by hate in this passage. So the word that Luke has Jesus use here for hate is not about malevolent opposition, or what we would think of as hate. It's really about preference, like I hate chocolate ice cream or something like that. So this same passage occurs in Matthew's Gospel, but that author renders it as whoever loves father or mother more than me. Same passage but different rendering. And that difference arises because Jesus spoke Aramaic and Hebrew. That's what Jesus spoke. The Gospels are written in Greek. The word that Jesus would have spoken has a range of meaning, like any word does. It's got a range of meaning. Ultimately, Matthew and Luke chose a different but equally valid Greek word to use in their respective texts. Because the version we use here in this church, the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition, is as close to a word-for-word Bible translation as you get, we receive the words as they are, even though it means, a difficult reception at first. So I hope that helps us understand the passage a bit better, because, as said, Jesus is really going for a powerful rhetorical effect here. He's trying to get across how serious the life of discipleship is. It is not all beer and Skittles, as it were. And at a study group last year in this parish, we spoke about, at one point, some of the difficult things that God has called us to. And one person said that one difficult thing that God had called them to was being a Christian. Absolutely right. That was absolutely right. If we would be light and salt to the world, to take up our cross and follow Jesus and be ambassadors for his kingdom of love, justice and peace, it's difficult. We will always have competing loyalties and priorities. And speaking particularly to the other dads here on Father's Day, surely it's a common enough experience to worry about how you're balancing priorities across work, family, being a husband, being a dad, being a friend, being a disciple, being a community member, whatever it is you've got going on. Surely it's a common enough experience that we worry about that stuff. How are we balancing it? Indeed, if we ever stop worrying about that and take parts of our life for granted, maybe that's the time to really start worrying. We can have a lot of things to balance in life, and we give preference to them in different ways. And we can love all of them. Family, friends, work, nation, Fremantle Dockers, hobbies, our parish church, denomination, religion, whatever. We can love all of them. And with some of them, we should love them fiercely. But each of those things, every one of them, each of those things can become an idol. They can become an idol. And you can consider for yourselves, do some imaginative exercises about how idolatry may manifest in each of those cases. So what Jesus is asking us to do, I think, is hold all of those things that we've got going on. All of them. Hold them in view of God. And it's a good time on Father's Day to be reminded of what we mean when we call God the Father Almighty. Because in terms of the origin of that word Almighty, it's not chiefly a declaration of power, but really means something like holder of everything. Almighty means holder of everything. So all those other things which we must hold in balance, we commend in trust and relate to most healthily through God Almighty, the holder of everything. We may love things and people fiercely, but if that is corrupted, it is possible that good and godly love can become something stifling, oppressive, jealous, fearful, and end up going down a path which runs counter to the ethical imperatives of Jesus' kingdom. And that is a danger of idolatry. I think at core, idolatry is the primal sin identified and made manifest, and it recurs in different guises throughout the biblical narrative and in any day and age. So I think Jesus is making a point about idolatry just as he is about the serious cost of discipleship. And I realise idolatry might seem like an archaic sort of word, but I have an internal sense that recovering language around this and pointing it out is an important part of Christian witness at this time. Worshipping as God that which is less than God is a spiritual danger with consequences in the physical, psychological, and social realm. It's a spiritual danger with consequences in all of that. So I'll flesh out one example. Back on the 9th of February this year, the Director General of ASIO, the Australian Security Intelligence Operation, gave the annual ASIO Threat Assessment. And that's one of those annual things that are worth tuning into. It's a bit like the Queen's speech at Christmas. You want to listen to the ASIO Director General's speech. But there was really some quite shocking stuff in it, as there is every year. A few of them being, Children as young as 13 are now embracing extremism, and this is happening with religiously motivated violent extremism and ideologically motivated violent extremism. Children and teens now account for about 15% of new counter-terrorism investigations, while only a few years ago it was 2 to 3%. And each and every week, teenagers make up more than half of the highest priority investigations because of violent threat. And the Director General said, as a nation, we need to reflect on why some teenagers are hanging Nazi flags and portraits of the Christchurch killer on their bedroom walls, and why others are sharing beheading videos. And he lamented, we, ASIO, do not belong in the schoolyard. And while we act when there is a threat of violence, the broader trend of teenage radicalisation demands a different response, one where ASIO and law enforcement are not the answer. So that's really sobering stuff. And again, whilst in that example, we could very helpfully look at a whole range of factors, psychological, economic, familial, social, religious, ideological, so on, I think there is also very much a place to look at a spiritual component to this, which can be identified as idolatry. Because if love for something, anything, becomes twisted, if you come to Jesus and want to follow but have other priorities that have a toxic edge, that can be a huge problem for ourselves, for others, and not to mention in terms of our relationship with God. So as said at the start, being a Christian is hard. The calling to love, as Jesus did, is difficult. But count the cost. Count the cost. Hold those things which we love that are finite before God who is infinite. The God whom we dare to call Father or Mother, if you prefer. Consider all that we hold briefly on earth in view of the Almighty who holds all of us, all of our loved ones, and loves us more than we could know. Estimate the cost of that if you can. Count the cost. And most of you already have, I know. Count the cost and then continue in discipleship of Jesus. The Lord be with you.